The clock on the kitchen wall showed 4:30 p.m., and Lisa knew her evening was about to begin. She tied her black apron around her waist and checked her reflection in the small mirror by the staff entrance. Her uniform was pressed, her hair pulled, back neatly, and her smile was ready even though she felt exhausted. Rosewood Manor wasn't just any restaurant. It was the kind of place where people came to celebrate million-dollar deals and important anniversaries. The kind of place where a single bottle of wine cost more than Lisa made in a week. The dining room had crystal chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds and tables set with more forks than most people used in a month. Lisa had been working here for 3 years now, ever since she turned 25. Every evening she watched wealthy couples share expensive meals while she carried their plates and refilled their water glasses. She knew the menu by heart, could recommend the perfect wine pairing, and had mastered the art of being helpful without being noticed. But tonight felt different somehow. Maybe it was because her rent was due tomorrow, or maybe it was because she'd gotten another rejection letter from the music school she'd applied to. Either way, Lisa felt the familiar weight of disappointment sitting heavy on her chest. "Table, 12 wants extra bread," called out Tom, another server who'd been working here even longer than Lisa. "And the lady at table 6 is asking about gluten-free options again." Lisa nodded and grabbed the bread basket. As she walked through the dining room, her eyes automatically drifted to the corner where the grand piano sat. It was a beautiful black Steinway, polished until it gleamed under the soft lighting. Most nights, a professional pianist would sit there playing gentle background music while guests enjoyed their meals. But tonight the piano bench was empty. She'd asked the manager once about the piano, trying to sound casual. "Oh, that old thing," he'd said with a wave of his hand. "Cost the owner a fortune, but it sure makes the place look classy. The pianist we hire charges $800 a night just to play dinner music. $800. Lisa tried not to think about what she could do with that kind of money. It would cover her rent with enough left over for groceries and maybe even a small payment toward her student loans from music school. Yes, Lisa had gone to music school. For 2 wonderful years, she'd studied classical piano at the city's music academy. Her teachers said she had real talent, the kind that could take her places. But then life happened the way it sometimes does to ordinary people with big dreams. Her younger brother Jake had gotten into college on a partial scholarship, but it wasn't enough to cover everything. Their parents had died in a car accident when Lisa was 22 and Jake was only 17. Suddenly, Lisa wasn't just responsible for herself anymore. She was all Jake had, so she'd made a choice. She dropped out of music school, got a job at a coffee shop during the day, and started working at Rosewood Manor in the evenings. Every penny she made went toward Jake's tuition, his dorm room, his textbooks, and all the little expenses that came with college life. "It's just temporary," she'd told herself 3 years ago, "just until Jake graduates." But temporary had a way of becoming permanent when you weren't paying attention. Jake was now in his senior year, and Lisa felt like she'd forgotten how to dream about anything beyond paying bills and making sure there was food in the refrigerator. She delivered the bread to table 12 with her practiced smile. The couple didn't even look up from their conversation about their upcoming trip to Italy. Lisa had learned not to take it personally. To most of the guests here, servers were like furniture, useful but invisible. As she walked back toward the kitchen, she passed the piano again. Without thinking, she let her fingers brush against the keys as she walked by. The soft sound made her heart ache with memory. She remembered the feeling of sitting at a piano, her fingers dancing across the keys, creating something beautiful out of nothing but air and emotion. "Hey, Lisa," called Maria from behind the bar. "Can you grab some more wine glasses from the back? We're running low." Lisa shook herself back to reality and hurried to the storage room. This was her life now. Wine glasses and dinner orders, not concert halls and standing ovations. She'd made peace with it mostly. Jake was doing well in school, majoring in engineering, and he'd already had several job interviews lined up for after graduation. Her sacrifice would be worth it when he walked across that stage with his diploma. But on nights like tonight, when she was tired and the bills were piling up and her back ached from carrying heavy trays, she allowed herself to feel sorry for herself just a little bit. The dinner rush started at 6 o'clock sharp, table after table filled with well-dressed people who ordered expensive steaks and bottles of wine that cost more than Lisa's weekly salary. She moved through the dining room like a dancer, taking orders, delivering food, clearing plates, always, with that same professional smile. At table 15, a group of business executives celebrated closing a big deal. They ordered champagne that cost $400 a bottle and didn't even finish it. At table 8, an elderly couple quietly celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, sharing a piece of chocolate cake and holding hands across the table. Lisa found herself watching the couples especially. She wondered what it would be like to have someone special to share expensive dinners with. Someone who would hold her hand and look into her eyes like she was the most important person in the world. But dating was a luxury she couldn't afford, right now. Between work and exhaustion, there wasn't much time for romance. Around 9 o'clock, the pace finally started to slow down. Most tables were finishing their meals and the kitchen was beginning to clean up for the night. Lisa was refilling water glasses when she overheard a conversation at table 4. "I can't believe the pianist canceled at the last minute," a woman in an expensive dress was saying to her companion. "The charity event is tomorrow night and we've got 200 people coming. How are we supposed to find someone on such short notice?" "What about the piano player who usually works here?" the man suggested. "He's booked for a wedding. I've called everyone I can think of. Good pianists don't just grow on trees, you know." Lisa's steps slowed as she listened. A charity event. 200 people. They needed a pianist. Her heart started, beating faster, but she quickly pushed the crazy thought away. She was a waitress, not a performer. She hadn't played seriously in 3 years. Even if she could still play the way she used to, which was a big if, she could never perform for 200 important people. Could she? Lisa finished her shift at 11 o'clock, her feet aching and her apron stained with sauce from a mishap, at table 9. As she walked past the piano one last time, she couldn't help but stop and really look at it. Tomorrow night, somewhere in this city, 200 people would gather for a charity event. And they would need music. Lisa couldn't sleep that night. She tossed and turned in her small apartment, thinking about the conversation she'd overheard at table 4. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw herself sitting at a piano in front of 200 people. Sometimes in her imagination she played beautifully and everyone applauded. Other times her fingers forgot what to do and she made a fool of herself. By morning she'd convinced herself it was a silly idea. She was a waitress, not a concert pianist. Sure, she'd been good once, but that was 3 years ago. 3 years was a long time in the music world. Her fingers probably wouldn't even remember the complicated pieces she used to play. But as she got ready for her day shift at the coffee shop, she couldn't stop humming. It was a piece by Chopin that she'd learned in her second year of music school. Her fingers moved on the kitchen counter as if they were touching piano keys, playing the melody from memory. The coffee shop was busy that morning. Lisa made lattes and cappuccinos, served pastries and cleaned tables, but her mind kept wandering. During her lunch break, she found herself walking past the music store downtown. She stopped in front of the window, looking at the keyboards and sheet music on display. "Can I help you with anything?" asked the store owner, stepping outside. "Oh, I was just looking," Lisa said quickly. "You play piano?" he asked, noticing how she was staring at a beautiful digital piano in the window. "I used to," Lisa admitted. "A long time ago." The man smiled kindly. "It's never too late to start again. Music has a way of staying with you, even when you think you've forgotten it." Lisa nodded and walked away, but his words stuck with her. Music has a way of staying with you. Maybe he was right. Maybe she hadn't lost everything after all. That evening, Lisa arrived at Rosewood Manor earlier than usual. The restaurant wouldn't open for another hour, which meant the dining room was empty and quiet. She stood in the doorway, looking at the grand piano in the corner. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. Before she could change her mind, she walked over to the piano and sat down on the bench. The keys were cold under her fingers, and for a moment, she just sat there, not moving. What if she'd forgotten everything? What if her fingers wouldn't work the way they used? So, slowly, carefully, she pressed one key, then another. The sound was rich and warm, filling the empty restaurant. She tried a simple scale, then another. Her fingers felt stiff at first, like they were remembering how to move. But gradually, muscle, memory took over. She began to play a simple piece she'd learned as a child. For Elise by Beethoven. It was basic, something every piano student learned, but it felt good to hear the familiar melody again. As she played, she felt something inside her chest begin to loosen, like a knot that had been tied too tight for too long. That sounds beautiful. Lisa jumped and spun around. Her manager, Mr. Davidson, was standing in the doorway with a surprised expression on his face. "I'm sorry," Lisa said quickly, standing up from the piano bench. "I know I'm not supposed to touch it. I was just—" "Wait," Mr. Davidson said, holding up his hand. "How long have you been able to play like that?" Lisa felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I went to music school for a while, but that was years ago. I'm really sorry, I won't touch it again." Mr. Davidson walked closer to the piano, looking thoughtful. "You know, I've been in the restaurant business for 20 years and I've heard a lot of piano players. Most of them are just background noise, if you know what I mean. But what you just played, that had feeling in it." Lisa didn't know what to say. She'd expected to get in trouble, maybe even fired. She hadn't expected a compliment. "There's actually something I wanted to talk to you about," Mr. Davidson continued. "Mrs. Chen was in here last night. You remember the lady at table 4 who was talking about her charity event?" Lisa nodded. She remembered everything about that conversation. "Well, she called this morning in a panic. Apparently her pianist for tonight's event just canceled. Some kind of family emergency. She's desperate to find someone, and she's willing to pay well, very well." Lisa's mouth went dry. "How well?" $1,500 for 3 hours of work. $1,500. Lisa tried to keep her face calm, but inside her mind was racing. That was more than she made in a month at both of her jobs combined. That was enough to pay her rent for 2 months and still have money left over for groceries. "The thing is," Mr. Davidson continued, "it's not just any event, it's the annual Children's Hospital benefit. Very fancy, very important people. The mayor will be there, some city council members, lots of business leaders. The kind of people who donate serious money to help sick kids." Lisa's stomach fluttered with nervousness. Important people. The mayor. What if she messed up in front of everyone? "I know it's short notice," Mr. Davidson said. "But after hearing you play just now, I think you could do it. Mrs. Chen needs someone who can play background music during dinner and maybe a few special pieces during the program. Nothing too complicated." I don't know," Lisa said honestly. "It's been so long since I performed in front of people, and these aren't just any people. What if I make a mistake?" Mr. Davidson smiled. "Lisa, you've been working here for 3 years. I've watched you handle difficult customers, manage crazy busy nights, and always keep your cool. You're tougher than you think." Lisa looked back at the piano. $1,500 would change everything for her. She could pay off some of her credit card debt, maybe even start saving a little money for the first time in years. And it was for a good cause, helping children at the hospital. But what if she wasn't good enough anymore? What if she sat down to play and nothing came out but wrong notes and embarrassment? "Would you like me to call Mrs. Chen?" Mr. Davidson asked gently. "You don't have to decide right now. Maybe you could meet with her first, talk about what she needs." Lisa took a deep breath. Sometimes in life, you had to take chances. Sometimes, you had to believe in yourself even when you weren't sure you should. "Okay," she said quietly. "You can call her." An hour later, Lisa was sitting in the restaurant's back office, talking on the phone with Mrs. Chen. The woman sounded frazzled, but hopeful. "I heard you play piano," Mrs. Chen said. "Mr. Davidson says you're very talented." "I'm a bit out of practice," Lisa admitted. "That's okay. What I really need is someone who can play dinner music. You know, classical pieces that create a nice atmosphere while people eat. And then maybe 1 or 2 special pieces during the program portion of the evening. Something elegant but not too showy. Lisa felt a flutter of excitement despite her nervousness. What kind of pieces were you thinking? Maybe some Chopin? Something people would recognize but still sophisticated. The goal is to create a beautiful evening that will inspire people to donate generously to the Children's Hospital. Children's Hospital? Lisa thought about all the sick kids who would benefit from the money raised tonight. How could she say no to that? I'll do it, she said before she could change her mind. Wonderful. Mrs. Chen sounded relieved. The event starts at 7 o'clock at the Grand Ballroom downtown. Can you be there by 6 for a quick sound check? Yes, Lisa said, her heart pounding. I'll be there. After she hung up the phone, Lisa sat in the quiet office for a moment, trying to process what she'd just agreed to do. In 6 hours, she would be playing piano in front of 200 important people. She had 6 hours to remember how to be a pianist again. Lisa stood in front of her tiny apartment closet staring at her limited wardrobe. What did someone wear to play piano at a fancy charity event? Her work uniforms definitely wouldn't do, and her casual clothes seemed too informal for such an important evening. Finally, she settled on a simple black dress she'd bought for her music school recitals 3 years ago. It still fit, though it felt strange to put it on again. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she almost looked like the pianist she used to be. Almost. Her hands were shaking as she tried to apply a little makeup. She kept thinking about all the things that could go wrong. What if she forgot the music halfway through a piece? What if her fingers cramped up from nervousness? What if everyone could tell she was just a waitress pretending to be a real musician? The bus ride to the Grand Ballroom felt like it took forever. Lisa clutched her small purse, which contained the only sheet music she still owned, a few pieces she'd kept from her music school days. She'd spent the afternoon practicing them in her head, trying to remember every note, every rhythm, every delicate phrase. The Grand Ballroom was more impressive than Lisa had imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from a soaring ceiling, and elegant, round tables were set with fine china and fresh flowers. Staff members in crisp uniforms were busy making final preparations, arranging centerpieces and polishing wine glasses until they sparkled. "You must be Lisa," said a well-dressed woman hurrying toward her. "I'm Mrs. Chen. Thank goodness you're here. I've been so worried about tonight." Mrs. Chen looked exactly like the kind of person who organized charity events for a living. Her hair was perfectly styled, her jewelry was understated but expensive, and she moved with the confident energy of someone used to making things happen. "The piano is over there," Mrs. Chen said, pointing to a beautiful grand piano positioned near the front of the room. "It's been tuned this afternoon, so it should sound wonderful. Do you need a few minutes to get familiar with it?" Lisa nodded, not trusting her voice. As she walked toward the piano, she felt like everyone in the room was watching her, even though most of the staff were too busy with their own preparations to pay attention to one nervous musician. The piano was magnificent. It was larger than the one at Rosewood Manor, with keys that felt smooth and responsive under her fingers. She sat down on the bench and played a few quiet scales, listening to the way the sound filled the large room. The acoustics were beautiful. Every note seemed to float through the air like it was meant to be there. "Sounds lovely," Mrs. Chen said, appearing beside the piano again. "Now, as we discussed, I'll need background music starting at 7 when guests begin arriving. Just gentle, elegant pieces that won't distract from conversation. Then during dinner, something a bit more substantial but still pleasant. And finally, I'd like you to play one special piece during our program portion, right before the main speaker." Lisa's mouth felt dry. "What kind of special piece?" "Something that will touch people's hearts," Mrs. Chen said. "Something that will remind everyone why we're here, to help children who are fighting for their lives. I trust your judgment on what to play." Lisa nodded, though inside she felt overwhelmed. How do you choose music that will make people want to donate money to help sick children? What piece of music could possibly be that powerful? As 6:30 approached, the first guests began arriving. Lisa watched them through the ballroom's tall windows. Men in expensive suits and women in elegant evening gowns. stepping out of luxury cars and walking up the red carpet that had been rolled out for the occasion. "Showtime," Lisa whispered, to herself. She began with Chopin's Minute Waltz, playing it softly as background music while guests mingled and found their tables. Her fingers felt stiff at first, but gradually they began to remember what they were supposed to do. The muscle memory was still there, buried under 3 years of serving tables and making coffee, but still there. As more people arrived, Lisa found herself relaxing slightly. Nobody seemed to be paying much attention to her, which was both good and bad. Good because it meant she wasn't making any obvious mistakes. Bad because it reminded her that she was still just back row. She played Bach's Prelude in C major, and then moved on to a gentle Mozart sonata. The room filled with the quiet buzz of conversation and the clink of glasses as guests enjoyed cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. Lisa caught glimpses of the crowd. She recognized some faces from the restaurant, wealthy regulars who probably didn't even remember her as their usual waitress. At 7:30, Mrs. Chen announced that dinner was served, and guests began taking their seats. Lisa switched to slightly more substantial pieces, a Beethoven sonata, some Debussy, a bit of Schubert. The music helped create the elegant atmosphere Mrs. Chen wanted, and Lisa began to feel more confident. But then she noticed something that made her stomach drop. At a table near the front of the room sat Mr. Hartwell, one of Rosewood Manor's most demanding customers. He was the kind of man who sent back his steak if it wasn't cooked to his exact specifications, and who never tipped more than 10%. And he was looking directly at her with a puzzled expression on his face. Lisa tried to ignore him and focus on her playing, but she could feel his eyes on her throughout the main course. She was sure he recognized her from the restaurant. What? Would he think about his waitress pretending to be a professional pianist? What if he said something to Mrs. Chen? As dessert was being served, Mrs. Chen approached the piano again. "It's almost time for your special piece," she said quietly. "Are you ready?" Lisa wasn't ready. She didn't think she'd ever be ready. But she nodded anyway. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Chen announced to the room, "before we hear from our keynote speaker, I'd like you to enjoy a special musical performance. Tonight's pianist will be playing a piece that I think captures the spirit of why we're all here together." The room grew quieter as guests turned their attention toward the piano. Lisa's hands were trembling as she placed them on the keys. She'd decided to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of the most beautiful and emotional pieces she knew. It was challenging, with delicate runs and dramatic crescendos, but it was also the piece that had always spoken to her heart. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes floated through the room like a whispered prayer. Lisa forced herself to forget about the audience, forget about Mr. Hartwell's stare, forget about her nervousness. She let herself disappear into the music the way she used to in her practice rooms at music school. The Nocturne told a story without words. It spoke of longing and hope, of sadness and beauty intertwined. As Lisa played, she thought about the children in the hospital who would benefit from tonight's donations. She thought about her own struggles and dreams, about the path that had led her from a music school practice room to serving tables to this moment, sitting at a grand piano in front of 200 people. Her fingers danced across the keys with growing confidence. The technical passages that had worried her flowed naturally, as if her hands remembered exactly what to do. The emotional heart of the piece swelled through the room, and Lisa felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. The pure joy of making music. As she played the final delicate notes, the room was completely silent. Lisa lifted her hands from the keys and looked up at the audience for the first time since she'd begun playing. What she saw took her breath away. The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Lisa sat frozen at the piano, her hands still hovering above the keys, staring out at 200 faces that were staring back at her. For a terrifying moment, she wondered if she'd made some horrible mistake. Had she played the wrong notes? Had the music been too sad for a charity event? Then someone started clapping. It wasn't polite applause like you'd hear after background dinner music. It was slow, deliberate clapping that seemed to come from deep appreciation. Then another person joined in, and another, until the sound filled the entire ballroom. But something even more amazing was happening. People were standing up. It started with an elderly woman at a table near the front. She rose from her chair, still clapping, with tears running down her cheeks. Then the man next to her stood, followed by their entire table. Like a wave spreading across the room, more and more people got to their feet until nearly everyone in the ballroom was standing and applauding. Lisa felt her own eyes fill with tears. She'd never experienced anything like this before. Even during her best recitals at music school, the applause had never felt this powerful, this genuine. These weren't just people being polite. They were truly moved by what they'd heard. "Bravo!" someone called out from the back of the room. "Beautiful!" shouted another voice. Mrs. Chen appeared beside the piano, her face glowing with excitement. She was clapping harder than anyone. "That was absolutely magnificent," she whispered to Lisa. "I've never heard anything like it." The applause continued, for what must have been 2 full minutes before people finally began to sit back down. But even then, Lisa could see people wiping their eyes and shaking their heads in amazement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Chen said into her microphone, "I think we can all agree that was something very special. Let's hear it one more time for our incredible pianist." Another round of applause erupted, and Lisa felt her cheeks burning with a mixture of embarrassment and joy. She gave a small bow from the piano bench, not quite trusting her legs to support her if she tried to stand. As the evening's program continued with the keynote speaker, Lisa remained at the piano, playing soft background music. But now everything felt different. People kept glancing in her direction, smiling and nodding their approval. During the speaker's presentation about the children's hospital, Lisa noticed that whenever he mentioned the young patients and their struggles, people would look toward her, as if her music had somehow connected them more deeply to the cause. When the formal program ended and guests began mingling again, Lisa found herself surrounded by people wanting to talk to her. "That was the most beautiful thing I've heard in years," said an older gentleman with kind eyes. "My granddaughter is a patient at the children's hospital, and your music, it somehow captured exactly how I feel about her courage." A woman in an elegant blue dress approached next. "I'm the music director at the Symphony Hall," she said, handing Lisa a business card. "I'd love to talk to you about performing with us sometime." Lisa stared at the card in shock. The Symphony Hall was where the city's most accomplished musicians performed. She'd dreamed of playing there when she was in music school, but it had seemed as impossible as flying to the moon. I don't understand," Lisa stammered. "I'm not a professional musician. I'm just a waitress." The woman looked surprised. "A waitress? With technique like that? You could have fooled me. That performance was absolutely professional quality." More people kept approaching. A music teacher wanted to know where Lisa had studied. A wealthy businessman asked if she gave private lessons. A local music critic was taking notes on his phone, asking questions about her background and training, but the most surprising visitor was Mr. Hartwell from the restaurant. Lisa had been dreading this conversation all evening, sure that he would somehow embarrass her or reveal that she was just a server pretending to be something she wasn't. Instead, he walked up with a sheepish expression on his face. "I have to apologize," he said quietly. "I've seen you at Rosewood Manor many times, and I'm ashamed to say I never really looked at you. Really looked at you as a person with talents and dreams. Tonight you've shown me that I've been missing something extraordinary." Lisa was so surprised she didn't know what to say. "I own a music venue downtown," Mr. Hartwell continued. "It's called the Blue Note. We feature local artists, and I'd be honored if you'd consider performing there. We pay our musicians well, and it's the kind of place where serious music lovers come to really listen." Lisa felt dizzy. A few hours ago, she'd been a waitress struggling to pay her bills. Now she had business cards from the Symphony Hall and an offer to perform at one of the city's most respected music venues. Mrs. Chen found her way through the crowd that had gathered around Lisa. "I hope you don't mind, but I've been telling people about you," she said with a huge smile. "The donations tonight have exceeded our wildest expectations." People were so moved by your performance that they've been writing bigger checks than we ever imagined." She leaned in closer and lowered her voice. "One gentleman was so touched by your music that he just donated $50,000 on the spot. He said your playing reminded him why music matters, why beauty matters, especially for children who are suffering." $50,000. Lisa could barely comprehend that number. Her music had somehow inspired someone to donate $50,000 to help sick children. "There's something else," Mrs. Chen continued. "Channel 7 News was here tonight covering the event. Their arts reporter heard your performance and she wants to do a story about you. She said it's exactly the kind of uplifting human interest piece people need to hear." Lisa's head was spinning. A news story? About her? As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, many of them made a point of stopping by the piano to thank Lisa personally. She collected more business cards than she could count, music teachers wanting to refer students to her, event planners asking about booking her for other occasions, even a wedding planner who said she'd pay top dollar for someone who could play with such emotion. Finally, as the ballroom began to empty, Mrs. Chen approached with an envelope in her hand. "Your payment for tonight," she said, handing it to Lisa, "plus a little extra. The event committee was so impressed that they voted to give you a bonus." Lisa opened the envelope and gasped. Instead of the $1,500 they'd agreed on, there was a check for $3,000. "Mrs. Chen, this is too much," Lisa protested. "Nonsense," Mrs. Chen replied firmly. "You earned every penny. You didn't just provide music tonight, you provided magic. You helped us raise more money for those children than we've ever raised before." As Lisa gathered her things and prepared to leave, she looked back at the grand piano one more time. 6 hours ago, she'd walked into this room as a waitress with a secret dream. Now she was leaving as something she'd almost forgotten she could be. She was leaving as a pianist. Outside the ballroom, Lisa pulled out her phone and dialed her brother Jake's number. It was late, but she knew he'd want to hear about this. "Lisa, is everything okay?" Jake answered, sounding worried. "Jake," Lisa said, her voice shaking with excitement and emotion, "I have something incredible to tell you." 3 months later, Lisa stood backstage at the Symphony Hall, wearing a beautiful black concert dress that actually fit her properly. Her hands weren't shaking anymore, though her heart was still beating fast with excitement rather than fear. Through a crack in the curtain, she could see the concert hall filling with people who had come specifically to hear her play. The news story about her had aired 2 weeks after the charity event, and it had changed everything. The reporter had called it From Waitress to Concert Pianist, a local woman's inspiring journey, and it had touched hearts all across the city. The video of her story had been shared thousands of times on social media, and suddenly everyone wanted to hear the waitress who could make people cry with her piano playing. But the real transformation had started the morning after the charity event when Lisa had called Mr. Davidson at Rosewood Manor. "I need to give you my 2 weeks' notice," she'd said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. "I figured as much," Mr. Davidson had replied with a chuckle. "Mrs. Chen called me this morning. She said you were magnificent last night." "I'm scared," Lisa had admitted. "What if this is just a fluke? What if I'm making a huge mistake?" "Lisa," Mr. Davidson had said gently, "I've watched you work here for 3 years. You've never made a mistake when it really mattered. Trust yourself." Those words had carried her through the terrifying and wonderful weeks that followed. She'd started by accepting the job offer from Mr. Hartwell at the Blue Note. 3 nights a week, she played for intimate audiences who came specifically to listen to music. The pay was better than both her jobs combined, and for the first time in years she could focus entirely on music. The Symphony Hall opportunity had come a month later. The music director, Dr. Williams, had invited Lisa to audition for their community outreach program. They wanted someone who could perform classical music in a way that connected with ordinary people, someone who understood that music wasn't just for the wealthy and educated. "You have something special," Dr. Williams had told her after the audition. "Technical skill can be taught, but the ability to make people feel something through music, that's a gift." Now, as Lisa waited for her cue to walk onto the Symphony Hall stage, she thought about how much had changed. She'd been able to pay off her credit card debt completely. She'd moved to a nicer apartment, one with a small upright piano that she could practice on whenever she wanted. Most importantly, she'd been able to tell Jake that he didn't need to worry about money anymore. She could handle her own expenses and still help him finish his last semester of college. 5 minutes, Miss Lisa, called the stage manager. Lisa took a deep breath and looked at her hands. These were the same hands that had served thousands of plates and cleaned countless tables. But tonight, they would play Rachmaninoff's Piano, Concerto No. 2 with the full symphony orchestra backing her up. It was the piece she'd always dreamed of performing but never thought she'd have the chance to play. The most amazing part was who would be in the audience tonight. Mrs. Chen had reserved an entire section for children from the hospital and their families. The charity event had raised so much money that they'd been able to fund a new music therapy program, and tonight's concert was a celebration of that success. Places everyone, announced the conductor. Lisa walked onto the stage, and the audience erupted in applause before she'd even reached the piano. She could see familiar faces in the crowd, Mr. Davidson from the restaurant, Dr. Williams, even some of the customers who remembered her from her waitressing days. But most importantly, she could see Jake in the front row, beaming with pride, as are. She sat down at the concert grand piano. Lisa felt a sense of completion that she'd never experienced before. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about everyone who had ever felt invisible. Everyone who had ever put their dreams on hold to take care of someone else. Everyone who had ever wondered if they were good enough. The conductor raised his baton and the orchestra began the opening of the concerto. When it was time for Lisa to join in, her fingers found the keys as naturally as breathing. The music flowed through her and out into the concert hall, filling every corner with sound and emotion. As she played, Lisa could see the children from the hospital in their special section. Some were in wheelchairs, others were wearing hats to cover heads made bald by treatments, but all of them were listening with wonder in their eyes. She played for them, for their courage and their hope, for their families who sat beside them holding their hands. The first movement of the concerto was playful and energetic, full of technical passages that showed off both Lisa's skill and the orchestra's precision. The second movement was more contemplative, a conversation between the piano and the other instruments that spoke of deep emotions without using words. But it was the third movement that brought the house down. It was triumphant and joyful, building to a climax that seemed to lift everyone in the concert hall up with it. Lisa's fingers flew across the keys and she felt like she was flying too, carried by the music and the energy of the audience. When the final notes faded away, the silence lasted only a heartbeat before the entire concert hall exploded in applause. The audience jumped to their feet immediately, and the sound was even more powerful than it had been at the charity event. This time, Lisa was ready for it. She stood and took a bow, then gestured to the orchestra to acknowledge their contribution to the performance. The applause went on for 5 full minutes. People were calling out, "Bravo!" and "Encore!" and Lisa could see that many people were crying happy tears. But what moved her most was seeing one little girl from the hospital section blowing kisses toward the stage, her face glowing with joy. After the concert, there was a reception where Lisa was surrounded by well-wishers and music lovers who wanted to congratulate her. But the moment that meant the most came when Jake pushed through the crowd to reach her. "I'm so proud of you," he said, hugging her tightly. "But I want you to know something. I was proud of you when you were a waitress too. You gave up your dreams to help me achieve mine, and I'll never forget that." "You don't have to be grateful anymore," Lisa said, tears in her eyes. "We both made it." A year later, Lisa had her own concert series at the Symphony Hall called Music for Everyone. The concerts were designed to be affordable and accessible, with tickets starting at just $10 so that families who couldn't usually afford classical music could come and experience it. She'd also started teaching piano lessons to children at the hospital, bringing music directly to young patients who couldn't leave their beds. The joy on their faces when they managed to play their first simple melody reminded her every day why music mattered. But perhaps the most satisfying change was that she no longer felt invisible. When she walked down the street, people recognized her and smiled. Not because she was famous, but because her story had reminded them that extraordinary things could happen to ordinary people who were brave enough to take a chance. Sometimes, late at night when she was practicing in her apartment, Lisa would think about that moment 3 years ago, when she'd first walked past the piano at Rosewood Manor. She'd had no idea that one day she would find the courage to sit down and play. The best part was knowing that her story wasn't over yet. It was just beginning.